Hey, how you doing? Welcome to Fine Business. I'm the Master Chief. I want to welcome you to my channel. It's a channel that talks about Coast Guard things, political things, other things that I want to talk about. And today I'm a little fired up because I listened to a great speech today by a fellow named Pete Hegseth. He's the Department of War Secretary. And he seems to be on fire with policy changes that are coming down from President Trump. And along that vein, these policy changes were announced to every flag officer, 07 and above, in the Department of War. I don't know if the U.S. Coast Guard was there. I would be really interested to know if they were there. And I'd also be interested to know if they're going to follow the same ethos as the Department of War, because there are some great things that happened, some great directives that came from Hegseth's speech. And I'll go over a couple of those things with you. But first, I wanted to, because this is what prompted me to do this video, I wanted to share what I thought and how I felt about Hegseth's speech on the U.S. Coast Guard Veterans page, with no periods, U.S. no periods, U.S. Coast Guard Veterans page, an apolitical page, and I just wanted to post that I was proud. I felt proud to be an American after listening to Hegseth's speech, and I wanted my Coast Guard to come back, the Coast Guard that I enlisted in a long time ago, back in the 70s. But my post didn't make it there because it was apparently viewed as a political post. I didn't know that being proud to be an American is a political thing. But I guess it is on the U.S. Coast Guard Veterans page. They're not sanctioned by the Coast Guard. It's a privately owned group. I am certain that the Coast Guard would not approve of one-sided posts about their service, and that appears to be what the Coast Guard Veterans Facebook page is doing. And again, there are other Coast Guard Veterans pages out there. I'm talking about one specifically. So excuse also my appearance today. I've got a little sty in my eye. I cut myself shaving. I'm a little grizzled. And what do you expect from an old man, an old veteran, an old retiree, an old grumpy Master Chief? Acting the way I want to act because I'm allowed to, and I'm not afraid to make mistakes. Unlike the armed forces of today, where flag officers and everyone below them is afraid to make a mistake. But let's get on to this speech. Let me just cover some of the highlights here. So one of the things that Hegseth said is, personnel is policy. The best way to take care of troops is to give them good leaders committed to the war-fighting culture of the department. Not perfect leaders, good leaders, competent, qualified, professional, agile, aggressive, innovative, risk-taking, apolitical, faithful to their oath and to the Constitution. Eugene Sledge, in his World War II memoir, wrote, quote, "War is brutish, inglorious, and a terrible waste." Now let me apply this to the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard doesn't have a warrior ethos. They have a guardian ethos. Our job used to be the Coast Guard jobs, or the primary job was to save lives and property at sea. That mission has changed over the decades, although I'm sure that's still the primary mission of the Coast Guard, saving lives and property at sea. It's counter to what the armed forces are doing when they're blowing up drug boats. And I mentioned on other posts that boarding for the Coast Guard has forever changed because of the way the Marine Corps and the Navy is taking care of business out in the Caribbean Sea. But I digress. We're supposed to save lives and property at sea. When I joined the Coast Guard, when I was a young kid, my only thought was, yeah, I can be a hero to somebody. We can save people's lives. But really, what I wanted when I was a young buck was 3 meals a day and a place to sleep and a little money in my pocket every 2 weeks or twice a month, because that's what the Coast Guard paid me. And over time, I grew to love what I did. I love the Coast Guard. I still do. I served in there a long time or retired from it. I think about my service every day. And I think overall about public service every day as well. And I can remember times at my duty stations where we would sit around a console, a communication console, or sit on the mess deck, and we'd talk about politics, and we'd talk about our president. President Carter was my first one, followed by Reagan. We got a lot of support out of President Reagan. But we were able to, as Coast Guards men and women, talk about our viewpoints with each other and argue with each other and yell at each other and call each other names and swear at each other. And then we go back to doing work because we have work to do. We're saving people's lives. Now, isn't that the same for the armed forces? Shouldn't it be the same for the armed forces, that you're allowed to speak your mind and disagree, but when it comes down to taking care of business, get in that foxhole and kill the enemy? That's what it's all about. It's about train and maintain. Let's continue. Let's continue with what Hegseth said. Foolish and reckless political leaders set the wrong compass heading, and we lost our way. We became the woke department, but not anymore. Right now, I'm looking out at a sea of Americans who made a choice when they were young men and young women to do something most Americans will not, to serve something greater than yourself, to fight for God and country, for freedom and the Constitution. And he goes on to say, Mr. Hegseth, there will be no more identity months, DEI offices, dudes in dresses, no more climate change worship, no more division, distraction, or gender delusions, no more debris. As I've said before and will say again, we are done with that shit. I made it my mission to uproot the obvious distractions that made us less capable and less lethal. Now let's superimpose what Hegseth said to the Coast Guard. How much of this applies there? I've been gone from there for a long time. We had a DEI problem, or did we? We had a commandant who was relieved for command. DEI came up in the background. Senior officers and enlisted complained. But what was their complaint about? Was it about equity? Or was it just about change in leadership? Was it about mission creep? Forgetting about saving lives and property at sea? And just focusing on other training and other things that we're doing, or the Coast Guard was doing, to kill time between missions? I don't know. Hegseth continues, today at my direction, each service will ensure that every requirement for every combat MOS, for every designated combat arms position, returns to the highest male standard only, because this job is life or death. Standards must be met. How does this apply to the Coast Guard? We have a high percentage of women in the Coast Guard, although I think it probably doesn't exceed 15%. It never really has. If it does nowadays, let me know in the comments. And by the way, like and subscribe if you like what you see. I don't post up here all the time, only when I get fired up, and today was one of those days. Women can go to sea, but they don't want to, according to a survey that was done years ago. Should they go to sea anyway? Are women capable of serving in every vocation in the U.S. Coast Guard? Can an ME, for example, in the Coast Guard on a boarding team wrestle down a drug person on a submersible boat at 25 or 30 knots? Is that possible? I don't know. That's up to the Coast Guard to figure out. But does what Hegseth says here make sense to Coast Guard people? And this is one you'll really love. Hegseth goes on to say, it's tiring to look out at combat formations, or really any formation, and see fat troops. Likewise, it's completely unacceptable to see fat generals and admirals in the halls of the Pentagon and leading commands around the country and the world. How many fat bodies were in there in that Quantico auditorium today? How many fat senior enlisted people were there in that auditorium today? Transpose this over to the Coast Guard. How many fat admirals do we have in the Coast Guard today, or fat senior enlisted people? I'm just asking. The Coast Guard has instituted some PT, some physical fitness requirements. Never before done, even when I was in the Coast Guard. I never had a weight problem, but I had people who worked for me that had a weight problem, and I got chewed out for trying to force them to lose weight. Is that happening in the Coast Guard these days? I don't want active duty people to answer me. You active duty people need to mind your own business and do what you're told. But I am talking to the vets and the retirees who remember the old days, how it used to be. And here's another one that's really interesting for the Coast Guard, something for the Coast Guard. Hegseth continues, no more beards, long hair, superficial individual expression. We're going to cut our hair, shave our beards, and adhere to standards, because it's like the broken windows theory of policing. It's like when you let the small stuff go, the big stuff eventually goes. So you have to address the small stuff. This is on duty in the field and in the rear. If you want a beard, you can join the Special Forces. If not, then shave. We don't have a military full of Nordic pagans. Now, the Coast Guard did away with beards a long time ago. Admiral Yost, God bless his soul, decided to get rid of beards during his tenure. And I was too young to even grow a beard. I didn't even know I could grow a beard until COVID, but that's a story for another day. There were so many upset people about growing beards in the Coast Guard. And then there's the folliculitis thing, too, with a lot of people, and no-shaved chits that went along in the Coast Guard. And the armed forces have cleaned that up as well. People with the folliculitis have a year to get that straightened out, or they're going to be discharged. I don't know how that's going to apply with the Army or a couple of the other armed forces who have a larger amount of people that may have folliculitis. And it's an ongoing condition for them, and one that probably can't be cured. Right now, there'll be no waivers for that, but I think that's going to be coming in about a year. We're not going to let people go because they can't clear up a skin condition. Now, here's another great sound bite from Secretary Hegseth. A blemish-free record is what peacetime leaders covet the most, which is the worst of all incentives. We as senior leaders need to end the poisonous culture of risk aversion and empower our NCOs at all levels to enforce standards. Truth be told, for the most part, we don't need new standards. Again, apply this to the Coast Guard. Have you ever met an officer who was a risk taker? I'm asking the question. And I don't mean a risk meaning, you wrote a memo and moved it over to someone else's desk and slipped it by the secretary. I mean, did you really take risk as an officer? If you're an officer watching me, what was that risk? Tell me. Let's take a little further in the Coast Guard. When I made Master Chief, there was no selection board. I was selected on my merit. I was selected through a service-wide examination. I was selected on the amount of sea time I had and the amount of awards I carried on my chest, the amount of time I served in the Coast Guard and the amount of time I served in my previous rank. No one chose me. I chose myself through hard study and work. It was my only path, the enlisted path, because I didn't want to be subjected to the whim of someone senior to force me to change my mindset. Did I take risks? Absolutely, I took risks. And some of you who know me know the biggest risk I took. Some big risks when we changed vocations in the Coast Guard way back in the day. So Hegseth continues, we're liberating commanders and NCOs. We are liberating you. We are overhauling an inspector general process, the IG, that has been weaponized, putting complainers, ideologues, and poor performers in the driver's seat. We're doing the same with the equal opportunity and military equal opportunity policies, the EO and MEO at our department. So there's going to be a complete reform of those areas. Stop being victims, people. You're not victims. You joined for a reason. You didn't join to be a victim. You joined to serve. No one's holding you back. And if they are holding you back, report it. And then get on with your life and get on with your service. So listen, no more frivolous complaints. No more anonymous complaints. No more repeat complainants. No more smearing reputations. No more endless waiting. No more legal limbo. No more sidetracking careers. No more walking on eggshells. Of course, being a racist has been illegal in our formation since 1948. The same goes for sexual harassment. So that's Hegseth's take on it. That's President Trump's take on it. It's probably my take on it. But even me, as conservative as I am and as hard-nosed as I am on some things, does people sometimes need a hand up? Yeah, they do. When I came up in the Coast Guard, I made mistakes. I don't know who helped me along the way. Those invisible people pulled me up. They helped me. I don't know who they were, and I thank them for doing it. I'm never going to know who they were. They're never going to tell me. They did it because they saw potential. And every NCO in the armed forces and every petty officer in the Coast Guard and the Navy looks for potential in the people who are junior to them, especially among the Chiefs Corps. We know what we want to perpetuate going forward into our service. Now, some of the most recent senior enlisted leaders have no idea what it was like. They think they're doing the best for their service, just like I thought I was doing the best for my service in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. But again, mission creep came in, DEI came in. You couldn't make Master Chief without being selected by a panel who is looking for a mold, looking for someone who is going to be a caricature, a pure representative of the Admiral Corps, of the Flag Corps. I didn't represent admirals. I represented workers in my job. I had to carry the party line in some cases, and I carried it well, and I didn't tell people when it wasn't the party line either. It was up to them to figure out. But my job primarily was to the people who work for me under my management. And I took care of them the best I could. And I didn't have to feed DEI down their damn throat. And so finally, what's going to replace all of these PowerPoint presentations like the one I'm giving you right here? Well, it's going to be in the armed forces, the other armed forces, absent the Coast Guard, because their policy will come, and I'm pretty sure it's going to mirror what Hegseth said, much to the chagrin of the left-leaning U.S. Coast Guard veterans moderators. When you don't train and you don't maintain, you demoralize. And that's when our best people decide to take their talents to the civilian world. The leaders who created the woke department have already driven out too many hard chargers. The Coast Guard is full of them. Let those people go. Let those people make mistakes. Grow them. Teach them how to take risks. So to summarize, and like I tried to tell the people on the U.S. Coast Guard Veterans page, but they wouldn't allow my post, I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud that I serve my country. I'm proud that I did it my way. I'm proud that I supported every president I worked for. I didn't divide between Reagan and Clinton and Bush and Carter. I didn't. Although I heard it in the field, and we'd argue the politics, but those presidents were my commander-in-chief, every single one of them. They're the ones who signed my paycheck. I got a president's signature on my retirement certificate, my certificate of appreciation. I won't tell you who it's signed by. What does it matter? I served honorably and hopefully with distinction. But I have a message for the Coast Guard veterans, U.S. Coast Guard veterans page. Open your page. Talking about changing the ethos of the Coast Guard is not a political post. Being proud that you're an American is not a political post. You're not representing the true ethos of the Coast Guard or the veterans or the active duty that are currently serving. Let go. Let go. Let the posts flow. Let the discussions happen. It's okay for Coast Guard people to disagree with each other. Being an American is apolitical. So let's try to act that way. Thanks. Like and subscribe. I'll see you down the road.